Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me the word. It's really a big pleasure to be here and participate to this session, which I think is illustrating the mutual commitment between the 2030 Agenda and science. And you may perhaps ask, how is the GSDR report influenced by this science policy question? And of course, as Enda was saying, we see it much more not only as a report, but really also as a process, giving impetus to this type of dialogue. So I think it is a very relevant question how to shape the science policy interface in the future. But of course, it's premature for big answers, so I would like just to make 3 points today. The first, I would like to ask, what knowledge can guide the Agenda 2030? And I would like to draw on my personal experience. Then I would like to reflect on what are the implications for the science policy interface. And thirdly, I would like to conclude on a few concrete action points. Good, we were asked to work with concrete examples, so I'm bringing you a mental slide, and I'm asking you to picture in your mind rolling hills in southeastern Laos. They're covered with forests. You see shifting cultivations on the slopes and paddy fields in the lowlands. And you see a very rapid change of land use happening. You see large stretches of rubber forest extending. You see the hills are transformed into maize for commercial production. The paddies are intensified, and you see concessions of banana production that goes towards China. And with the research project of the Global Land Programme of Future Earth, we have been studying the drivers and effects of these changes. And for that, we have looked at what functions does really land have. And we were looking, of course, at food function, but we were also looking at the economic jobs and income. And we were looking at the social, the land rights issue and the security for minorities, and also at the environmental stewardship. And when we then analyzed land use change, it became very clear that land use change reshuffles those functions, and hence it reshuffles the people who are interested in these functions. So it creates winners and losers. And if we think of land use change as a genuine form of development with an intention changing something, then it becomes clear it is always conflict. It is always winners and losers. And sustainable development, hence, is not harmony, trying to do it right for everybody, but it's actually about how can we navigate these trade-offs which are there? How can we navigate and maximize the co-benefits? And here comes the question, what knowledge can support that? And from our experience, of course, and we have heard it now a lot also in these days, we have to know these interlinkages. We have to understand the positive and negative feedback loops and time lags which are linked to it and who is affected. That's very clear. But we also have to move from describing a scientist just changes to understanding or guiding transformation, asking transformation towards what, how to do it, for whom. These are important questions. And lastly, when we were taking our evidence to the national policy level to discuss with policymakers, we realized these trade-offs had disappeared. And the evidence they were using, the World Bank or the World Development Indicators showed more foreign direct investment leads to better added value in agriculture, leads to poverty eradication, and even the forest had increased because there was more rubber plantations. So the evidence was there, so we have to understand when we change scale of evidence, also the image of sustainable development will change. What are the implications for a science policy interface? And I think the good news is that we have a huge potential to realize the true power of the 2030 Agenda. We can move away from this implicit chronology of research where we first ensure economic growth and opportunities, then we deal with the inequalities, and finally perhaps we will address the environmental issues. I think it is the power to really work within and with the system to navigate these trade-offs and to find a magnitude of new development pathways which are perhaps much better adapted to local contexts. And with this, I think we can also redefine the meaning of sustainable development. But there's also bad news, and I think the bad news is if we ask researchers, they will often say it depends. Because the knowledge gaps that we try to overcome are very complex and characterized by divergent interests, what we call wicked problems. And that means that no single scientist or no single scientific assessment can give all the solutions to policy. But we need to work together to learn in groups and science policy, but also civil society. Good. What I would like to conclude on 3 points, and I think it is a huge task ahead of us. And it's not just, changing the interface, presumably, of science and policy being fit for purpose. We have to change science, we have to change policy, and we have to change the interface. And that's a huge task, and it will need resources. And I will not be able to answer the question totally, but I would like to see 3 action points. And the first action point, I think, is we need to better use the already available knowledge. So we should use the matrix of 17 times 17 SDGs and the resulting 136 interactions as a means of managing available knowledge to collect information in different contexts, countries at global level, and make that available to everybody. It should be a major initiative. My second conclusion, I think we need to mobilize and innovate science. The question to science really is, are we part of this or do we stand aside? And I think with the same matrix of SDG interrelations, we should collect information, we should have a new research agenda, and it's also a grammar to do synthesis work, generalization and aggregating knowledge. And finally, we have to be stronger on the transformation perspective, to turn this telescope around, to work integrative ways, as it is already done by some science initiatives which need to be supported. And finally, I think we need to establish and institutionalize these science policy interfaces, not only at global or regional, but mainly also at national levels, where people meet, exchange, beyond science even, bringing other knowledge bearers to the table. But mind you, if we agree that knowledge also helps to define what sustainable development is, then I think it is very worrying that the distribution of knowledge and the density of scientists across the planet is very, very uneven. So I think there is a huge risk that if we don't have knowledge from different places, we will also have an unbalanced picture of sustainable development. So I would call also on countries to establish those science policy interfaces in the Global South, use partnerships, South-South and North-South, to populate them and empower these voices. Thank you very much.